Maybe to kick it off before we jump to the beef of the discussion today, I would say let's introduce ourselves. Maybe start with Tobias, so, and then I can make an introduction briefly to my side, and then also in venture, and then we come to the topic of the day.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So first of all, amazing to be here with you today. Also to have Solus with us on stage. Solus is an old friend of mine, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm Pavlos. I'm one of the co-founders of Digital. We're a data analytics company. But before starting my own company, I was part of a company called Choco. And Choco is a platform that connects restaurants and their suppliers. And it quickly became one of the fastest growing companies in Europe. Within less than 4 years, it became a unicorn. And I was very lucky to be one of their first employees. My role at the company was to launch their business in the US. So I was the person who went to the market, tested it, built a team, opened an office in San Francisco, and kind of like grew from there. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Hello, hello. My name is Solus. Hello to everyone. Hello to Avocco people who's watching outside. So I'm the CEO of the company called Avocco, and I'm primarily responsible for driving growth of the company. And one of the factors of driving growth is actually international expansion. So happy to share my thoughts on that topic too. Very short intro about Avocco. Avocco is a marketplace connecting scrapyards of how we Lithuanians call them shroty, to the people who buy parts all around Europe.
Fantastic. And I'm Kevin. I'm with Venture. We're the largest seed fund across the Nordics and Baltics. We just launched our fund number 4, which is 150 million, and we deploy basically across the Nordics and Baltic purely. We write tickets up to 4 million initially, and then we have capabilities to basically follow on. And we had the pleasure to work with fast-growing companies like Volt or Swappy or Material Exchange, and we kind of like always work quite close to the large international expansion plans. And I think that's something which is eligible to talk because we have seen pre-seed seed companies in the Nordics and Baltics standing in front of kind of after they raise the seed round towards the expansion, which is usually the biggest make or break point for all the seed companies because we unfortunately are in small markets in the Nordics and Baltics, which basically needs, by default, you need to expand quite rapidly out of your home market. But it's not kind of like a quite easy task to do so. Hence, kind of like we invited the 2 experts to talk about it today because obviously they know more about it than we do. Because I also believe you shouldn't always listen to investors because we are more conservative than you might think. But maybe kicking it off with the big question, like when is the right timing to expand? Because I think we can maybe jump first into the point, like when did you expand with Choco? When did you expand with Avocco? And then basically when is the right timing? Because for us as investors, what we always would like to see initially is initial indicators of product market fit before you actually go out. Why do we say this? Because initial product market fit enables you to basically 2 things. First, you understand your ICP, you understand your customer discovery, and you also understand how product market fit looks like before you enter a new market, right? And on the other side, on the positive side, you have a revenue engine unlocked, which basically enables you also to shift focus to a new market. But how's it with you guys? Maybe starting off with Saul. When did you expand the first time? And when do you believe is the right time to expand?
Yeah, so I think regarding the Avocco story, we actually, in a way, expanded from the very early stages because when the company was set up, we started seeing people buying, spare parts from us from Italy, Spain, just organically going through, Google search and finding us. So that was, a good precedent that, the product market fit exists not only in your country, but probably in other countries if they're finding you organically. But I think if I have to look at it, I think it's very important, a couple of factors to consider when to expand. So one, do you have a product market fit in your local market? And usually there are a couple of factors that might decide that. One is what we will look at is actually repeat number of sales. Are they actually repeating? Are they actually repeating with a higher degree of frequency? That's a very good indication of that. Another one is, competition. Basically, if you're really winning your local market, but you're winning, let's say you have 40% of the, penetration of the local market and the competitor has 30%, is it a good time to actually expand it? You should consider whether you actually have a chance of winning that market, because if you have a small team and you expand too early, you might just focus and lose the competition. So for us, we actually started properly expanding when we really have had a dominant position in Baltics, and at the same time we had the funding to do it. So we raised our Series A and we started expanding in the Western countries from the demand side.
from Choco's side, we started expanding, I think, from the day one that we launched. I think even when I was kind of getting recruited, one of the conversations that we had was about like international expansion. So I think it was very much in the DNA of the company that we're thinking global from day one. So I think the storyline was that we launched in Berlin. We had product market fit fairly quickly. Within 1 or 2 months, we launched in Paris, our second market. And I think within like 6 to 9 months, I was in San Francisco opening up our first US office. I think the story behind launching the US is quite a unique one. We were very focused in Berlin doing sales. Like it was very intense. Like we go to restaurants every single day, like talking to 30 people a day, going to meetings and kind of like staying in the office till like midnight. And at some point, kind of Christmas came around, like December, and we realized that no one wants to take sales meetings at Christmas, especially if you run a restaurant. You have so many events, so many things happening. So there's a guy trying to get you to use some kind of app. Like definitely you don't have space for that. So we decided, okay, why don't we go to the US and try out and see maybe there's an opportunity to do sales there. Turns out in the US, doing sales anytime is no problem. I kind of landed there alone, 3 weeks, ticket, Airbnb, and kind of like figured out how to grow from there.
Fantastic. I mean, absolutely jeopardizing our agenda, but first you mentioned it like, was you expanded with the Series A, you expanded basically from day one, and I think that's kind of like always the perception of what we investors tell founders, like find product market fit, raise the seed round, on the back of the seed round, raise the Series A, and between seed and Series A, you can basically expand and then raise on the metrics, right? Yeah. But obviously now, you had more money by hand to expand. You arguably has also kind of like a more capital intense business like Choco has. And obviously you told me in the pre-discussion, you basically expanded by day one, right? Yeah. So kind of like, how do you believe founders to think about like capital intensity of launching a new market and expanding? Like, would be great to get your thoughts because I think the misperception is sometimes right, but also wrong in a sense. So kind of like, what would you advise founders to do in terms of capital intensity when launching a new market?
So maybe I'll start. I think in Choco's case, their business model is very asset light. And I think there are certain business models and certain marketplace models that allow you to fast very, very quickly, especially if you're able to expand basically just by sending a commercial team. And I think that's the best litmus test to find out if your kind of company is easily scalable is can you find a team of, I don't know, 5 salespeople, find an account manager, maybe a customer success person, and go to a new market and basically start operations there. Those kind of businesses are very easily replicable and very easy to scale. Additionally, I think for us, we saw a market opportunity at that particular time. I think certain markets that represented a big portion of our TAM, for example, the US and Western European markets, didn't have any formidable competition. So we knew that we also need to do it very, very fast before someone else does it. So there was also kind of like urgency to launch very, very quickly in order to win those markets.
So it's pretty much a rocket internet back in the days. No, maybe not to you, so. Like, how do you think about it? Because you obviously have like way larger capital by your hands.
So I think we think in international expansion in like 3 ways. One is proving product market fit. I'm a fair believer that you can go into the market and with less than 50K, you can try to prove it whether actually your product or service is needed. Pavel has done it with his own like sweat equity, not having like no 50K perhaps or something like that. Another one is scaling. And scaling I think depends really on the business model. In our case, we are a marketplace, so we think from the demand and supply. On the demand side, quite a fraction of our users are customers, so not businesses. So with that you can launch by scaling digital advertising, and for that you don't need a lot of capital intensity, and sometimes you get a good return of investment on the money that you can reinvest after some period of time. But in terms of, for example, supply, and Poland is a huge market for us. You have to have a sales team because we're selling to the scrappers. We have the B2B SaaS, and for that you need the team, the structure, legal entity, and everything else, and that requires much more capital. So I think it really depends when you think about it. In some cases it's easier, in some cases it's more expensive. We would really look at the model, but in our case, from the demand, it's actually not that capital intensive. From the supply, it is. But there's an upside of that as well.
I mean, it makes totally sense. And I mean, maybe to shift gears now a bit, the next questions we receive always as a fund is kind of like where to expand to, right? And now I can tell you a bit how our pre-discussion yesterday went. Because what we usually tell founders, like make a thorough analysis, collect enough data points on the different market to kind of really analyze to the last data point if it makes sense to expand to the respective market. I mean, there are also a lot of soft factors like competition, general funding environment, et cetera, et cetera. And then I presented this to you guys, how we usually operate with our founders, and you said, no, fuck it. Don't collect enough data points, just go out test before you launch, right? So maybe kind of like walk us through your thought process and kind of like general approach when you decided to go to a new market. How did you do the not so much data collection part of things and decide on where to go next?
So on our side, we actually did a bit of data collection. I remember this management meeting that we had before expanding, and the management meeting started the following: like, if you would take €1 million from the bank account, which we had, and we would hire like 3 consultancy companies to pick the market to expand, they will probably find the best market. And everyone agreed in that management meeting. And then we asked a follow-up question. Well, what about if we really focus as a team? Can we be those consulting companies because we have a domain knowledge? And everyone agreed. So that's what we did. We basically looked at 12 markets, analyzed from 4 angles, like microeconomics. Is the average age of a car old? If it's old, they probably need some spare parts. Competition, supply, also a little bit of growth metrics, because at the beginning we had some sales. And then we picked some countries, and we picked one country. And were we wrong? No, that country is like number 4 right now, but the number 1 is the one that we didn't pick. So data helps you a little bit, but probably practice helps you more.
Makes you productive, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of value to doing desk research, right? Like you can look at like very tangible things. You can look at, I don't know, like number of restaurants, total market size. You can look at concentration of restaurants per area. You can look at any kind of like metrics that are important. You can look at intangibles, right? Like what's the importance of a specific market in a larger market. For example, San Francisco, not many people know it's the 2nd largest city in terms of Michelin-star restaurants in the US. So it has like a lot of importance in gastronomy. You also have a lot of kind of like exposure to investors and top talent. So there's like intangible things that make a market very attractive. However, there's a lot to learn when you go into the market and speak to the people themselves, right? You can build very complex Excel models, and it makes you feel very productive and very smart, I think. But when you go in and talk to customers and actually try to acquire customers, you also get a depth of knowledge that you wouldn't have otherwise. You not only understand if the market is ready for you to expand, but you also learn, okay, like how can I do sales here? How can I, how does the supplier market look like? How does the operations market look like? How does the talent market look like? There's a lot of things that you learn in those, let's say, a month or so of doing kind of market testing that otherwise you wouldn't know because you're just building an Excel model. And on top of that, I believe it's not that capital intensive to do so, like buying a flight ticket, getting an Airbnb, and, like a small budget for food. So the person who's on the ground doesn't die from hunger, I think is more than enough to get all those learnings.
So you basically both would advise like over-engineer on basically being on the ground and test before you launch, and kind of like not to put too much weight on the data side. I think that's everything what a VC doesn't want to hear when we talk to you. Companies at the end of the day. But maybe like what is a piece of advice you would give every of those early stage founders when they think about expanding next, right? Maybe like also consider the attractiveness of the Eastern European side of things, right? Because I don't know how much you know about Volt's expansion story, but Volt came quite late to the game of food delivery in 2014, right? I mean, in Central Europe, we had food delivery, we had Foodpanda, Lieferando, Deliveroo. So you could basically argue the market was quite saturated, right? So hence, what they have done at the end of the day is, and I can tell you they have not opened up an Excel sheet, I can tell you that, expanded Eastern European, kind of like went into the overlooked markets. So maybe like elaborate on kind of like what is the piece of advice you would give early stage founders in terms of like assessing market attractiveness, and maybe also thinking about what do others not do, what I can do in order to maybe capture market share others maybe oversee.
Yeah, I think it's super important to think about timing. There are markets that are open opportunities, and you can go in without competition and win a lot of customers, get a lot of revenue, build up the team, build up the product, raise another round, and doing all of that like in a fairly easy way by taking markets that are not competitive. And there are markets where there are existing players that are quite well funded, have good products, have strong teams. And I think it's not a question like if you should go into these markets, depending obviously on the situation, but it's also a question about like when you should go into these markets. And I think it's also understanding your strategic position. Where are you? Maybe you're a smaller team, maybe your product still lacks some features and you need to wait till entering those competitive markets. And then when you do, that you enter in the right way. And then, maybe your competitors end up like spending a bunch of money, competing with each other, giving each other discounts, and then you can come in and really take the market. I think that's what we had with Volt and Berlin, right?
I think there are three things that I would look at based on our experience. So one is basically, well, three factors basically. One is how big of the market it is, and it can actually go both ways. Like from the demand side, usually the bigger the market is, the better. You don't necessarily compete directly that much with the competition. You have a lot of buyers who already have a presence, but in some cases, smaller markets make sense as well. So especially if you're like a marketplace business and supply and constrained marketplaces, so you want to dominate the supply first, and if the country is big and you need to dominate the supply through the B2B of sales, it might be easier to win that country by the smaller one. And when you win that country from the supply, the network effects usually kick in. Buyers becoming very, very cheap. They go directly to you. Don't need to do a lot of advertising. Second component that I would look is competitiveness. Like in our case, France, we thought it's a very competitive market. But actually, if your offering is very good, you have good prices, or your product is 100% better than the competition, you can actually take the customers that already know how to use our service and acquire them cheaper than actually educating the market to use it. And the third one, very quickly, is I think it's a regulation. Sometimes we overlook in the auto space, like in France, for example, there's a law that requires repair shops to offer used car part repair as an alternative to the new one in writing, and that's regulated. And it's only in France at the moment. So if you miss that, it might be missed opportunity as well.
Maybe to add this, there's a funny story from Bolt, our beloved Estonian unicorn. I remember when they wanted to go to the UK, they overlooked the license for taxis there, right? What they thought, okay, well, we don't apply for a license for taxis here. It takes us too long. We want to go to the market straight away. So they acquired a small company with a taxi license and thought they can operate on this license. Well, took them 3 days until they are out of the market. So I think it was probably the fastest exit out of a market Bolt ever went into.
Fastest entrance, fastest exit.
Exactly. Now talking about execution, right? Because I think a lot of founders are also kind of like thinking about how do I execute on it, right? And I think always comes down to successful expansion comes with a very successful execution excellence, I would even argue, right? So kind of like what is kind of like the must-dos in your point of view to be efficient and also effective when you execute the expansion strategy? Mm-hmm.
I think one, in our size especially, it's very, very important to align the teams to actually focus on that. So, before when we did tests in other markets, you would have in the management meeting say, well, let's try to focus on France for the next 2 months, etc. But everyone also has their own activities goals. Now we do it a little different. We take 4 teams and we said, look, we're gonna scrap OKRs for you. You're gonna be focusing on one single goal, expanding in this market, on this project. Give incentives, give more resources to that, and really say that's the most important for the company. If someone else goes in your way, put a blocker in it, redirect to the management. So I think hyper-focusing part of the team, but super intensively and motivating them on that goal is very important. And another one is basically strategies. I think, in our case, when we entered France, we tried different strategies, B2B sales, direct marketing activities, paid advertising. And you have to try a lot of things very, very quickly and understand what works. Because one is product market fit, and another is actually channel market fit.
Yeah.
Some channels may work for some businesses very well.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah. I would love to add on to what Solus was saying. I think one of the fundamental things are like the company values that are I think from day one, very, very important. And if the company is slow, it takes time to make decisions, it's risk averse, it's unlikely that an expansion team can succeed because you want those people to be lean, you want them to be able to take risks, to take decisions in the market that need to be taken to win those markets. So I think that's the first thing, is like kind of having the right culture for expansion. Secondly, I think it's also hiring the right people. It takes a certain type of person to be really successful when going to a new market and basically starting a startup within a startup. And it's really, really hard. It takes a many, many hours. It can be very, very lonely for people because you don't know anyone. You go into a foreign land. And you need to hire those type of people who are, first of all, very ambitious, very hungry, very humble, but at the same time think that this adventure of going and starting a company somewhere else is awesome. Because if you don't find joy in doing this, it's very, very hard to do it successfully, I think.
It makes a lot of sense. So I think to summarize it, pure focus or crystal focus, KPI tracking, kind of like know exactly what your North Star is. You say kind of like lean structure, fast decision making, and then hiring the right people. Maybe we add on the talent density here, right? Because I think that's a huge discussion in every board meeting before you expand, right? Do we need to hire on the ground people, or do we shift internal people to the respective country we are expanding to, right? I think that's the difference between pure B2B SaaS, because I think in pure B2B SaaS you need to hire people on the ground who can chit-chat with the respective customers in their respective language. But like, how does it go generally for you? How did it go? Because there's always the trade of like, do we take trained people or do we train people? What is more capital efficient?
Yeah. So at Choco, we had this concept of thinking in generations. So for example, let's say you open a market in Berlin. Let's say it's enough to have 5 people, but maybe you'll add 7 people, because then after you launch the market, out of these 5 people, you have 4 or 5 who can also go out and launch new markets. And kind of like this allows the company to grow really fast. I think there was a time where they were opening a new market every 2 weeks. So first answer I think is like structural. Okay, like how do you train teams so that they can expand one after the other? And we need to understand that expansion teams are also cultural or knowledge carriers within the company, right? Like you have your headquarters, and to hire a new person and to maintain the same culture, maintain the same processes, understanding of the product is very, very hard. So oftentimes teams that have been in the headquarters or maybe in the other expansion teams, they also carry that knowledge of product, processes, and values, as well as they have connection to the HQ, where if there's, let's say, like there's a feature request from your market, you already have those contacts and you can kind of like push that to be higher in the product roadmap and things like that. So I think like the structure is very important, and also the values. Yeah.
How was it for you?
Yeah, for us on the supply side, because we do sales, physical sales, we realize that almost every single culture has some like cultural differences. Even Poland, which is like our neighbor very close. So our kind of strategy was to hire one person, which is your advocate, and he will build the team and the structure behind it. And I think that's the most important part. And for that, my advice would be to everyone else: if you have investors in that country, you will be able to just utilize those connections to find the talent. So in our case, in Poland, for example, we hired Uber GM, like super, passionate guy, young, full of energy, and he built a team behind it. He even, said, my culture is going to be different in Poland. So instead of renting an office, he rented, a house, put all the adverts inside the house, and off scrap yards, cars, etc. And that's how he built the culture. But he's your advocate, and he's making that efficient. On the demand side, we have support here in Lithuanian and French-speaking languages for French markets. So we don't have people in there. So on that side, I think if your product is more of a digital advertising, through the digital advertising strategy, if you're utilizing that, you might not need to have many people until a certain stage. And that's actually, talent density is not that important factor. Later it will be, but at the very early stage, not necessarily.
That makes sense. And now kind of shifting a bit gears, I mean, obviously, you have a couple of VCs on your cap table. You work with Shoko, which is amazingly funded, right? So how would you advise early stage founders, kind of like when they're in the conundrum of basically, you have on the one hand side the VC who tells you like be conservative expansion, but on the other side potentially missing out on a quite capital efficient expansion strategy to unlock new markets and revenue, right? So how would you advise them? How would you think about it if you would redo it in a sense?
Yeah. So from the VC side, I would think when you talk with VCs, especially during the fundraising, right? They evaluate your company, but I would be very open, but at the same time, we take a punch of salt with advices from the VCs that don't analyze your company as much, because every single strategy is very specific. But what I would advise, if you're thinking international expansion, is to have someone investor that done that before. So in our case, we have an amazing investor, like super active, Mantas Mikuskas, who actually done a lot of international expansion. So he tends to give you advice and basically not to push you to think it through. And he says like, maybe it's too early, maybe it's not, because the VCs that look at it, if they have 2-3 meetings, sometimes they might not be able to assess what's the most optimal. Is it really capital intense? Is it not? So I would take it with a punch of salt, but having someone internally that would advise you that done that, super huge asset.
Yeah. How was it?
Yeah, I didn't have that much exposure to VCs, but I know that our investors were all kind of aligned on our global ambitions from day one, and I think that's also was one of the criteria of selecting them.
I mean, it makes tons of sense, right? And I think what obviously we discussed today, kind of like how to expand, when to expand, how to assess new markets, etc. You obviously need to differentiate what type of business model you actually drive, right? For B2B SaaS business, maybe not applicable what you just told us, but maybe for kind of like marketplaces, for instance, or platforms, I think it's easier to basically scale faster than maybe others, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And given we're running a bit out of time, I would like to give both of you, and also I'm going to tell a good story about Volt, the biggest failures in your expansion. Like, what is the single, let's say, disaster, even when you expanded to a new country? What is the biggest disaster plus learning?
Very good. Pavlos, what's yours? I think we didn't have a disaster, in terms of international expansion that much, but I think we had some misconceptions that, prevented us to do it efficiently. As I mentioned, we done this Excel model SL and we picked the market. Now it's the fourth market. But the one market that we overlooked is a highly competitive market to us. But actually, if you have a good offering, that's even easier to expand because you basically take over the customers of another, company that it has. And I think that if we would have knew that faster, or if we wouldn't have that preconception, that would allow us to even, expand even faster. That's one. And another one is basically just not aligning the teams, I guess, because if you don't align the teams, partly they will focus on that, partly they will focus on activities. You really need to have that crisp focus, and I think that would have saved us, months as well.
Yeah. When it comes to maybe lessons learned, I remember when we launched our first market, I recruited a team of I think salespeople, 6 salespeople. We got on the plane and we kind of flew to the US, and it was very, very intense. We kind of worked every day super hard, and I think the market launch was fairly successful. Within a month or so, I realized that we actually have no one who's looking after the customers. We have a bunch of people going out hunting and trying to find new restaurants to join our platform, but we don't really have a person who's kind of looking after them post sales. So that was kind of a big uh-oh moment where we realized, oh no, we need an account manager, someone who will take care of all these customers and kind of make sure that the ship kind of is steered in the right way with all the customers. So we kind of very quickly converted one of the salespeople into an account manager. She loved it and kind of solved the problem that way.
We're pretty much aligned with what you said in the beginning, rather test before launch, and kind of do capital efficient, right? And I have the allowance to basically explain now one of the beloved Vault stories, because Tony, the head of international expansion, should have been with us on stage today, but he's unfortunately sick, and he asked me to tell the story. So when Vault expanded out of Finland to Sweden as their second market, they did it super green behind their ears, how we would say in Germany. So absolutely no idea. They didn't localize the product. They sold still the product in euros, even though we all know Swedish has SEK as a currency. They didn't have a proper corporate governance structure. They didn't know who makes the decisions. They didn't have country lead, etc. But the biggest failure they had, and they learned quite significantly on their market entrance campaigns or marketing campaigns when they entered a new market, was what they have done. They always did something like a big splash with guerrilla marketing, right? And what they have done in Sweden as the first opening is they sprayed the blue pepper mills basically on the billboards. You remember, in the restaurant, the big pepper mills, right? And on the next day, one of the largest newspapers in Sweden basically said, Finnish dildo company is expanding to Sweden because they apparently look like a dildo, not like a pepper mill, right? And this is a good example how marketing can also fail. So it's basically, you will never get all the data points by hand to basically proper plan through an expansion strategy. It's always A/B testing at the end of the day, right? So I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with 3 of us today, and I believe you are very 2 experts in expansion here by our side. And I'm also quite sure if you ping them on LinkedIn, they are probably happy to give them advice to you. And I believe also a different point I wanted to mention is obviously that you don't always need to go to the center and to the biggest markets to expand. We have enough examples with Bolt and Vault in the Nordics and Baltics, which shows also expanding Eastern European first and going to overlooked markets is also a big success factor, right? So I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks very much, and thanks for coming here.